So this November, two incredibly unpopular ex-presidents are going to face off for who is going to run the most powerful country in the world. Trump was historically unpopular when he was president, and Biden is now out-polling Trump in being unpopular. So I think to understand why it is that these two people are the best that the US capitalism can offer tells you a lot about that system and the kind of crisis of US politics and US capitalism and actually kind of global questions as well. So what is the race looking like? Trump is looking even more dangerous than last time. He's promised to have his kind of rhetoric on deportation, on immigrants, has moved even further to the right. He's promising the largest deportation in American history. Quote, he's saying that immigrants are, quote, poisoning the blood of America. And on day one in office, he says that he'll wipe out the birthright citizenship. His rhetoric's moved to the right since January 6th. So even since kind of 2016, he's just moved to the right. Since January 6th, he's been nodding to the Proud Boys and the far right. He said after January 6th that the Proud Boys should stand back but stand by. And he sent very, very clear messages all through from 2016 to 2020. He emboldened the far right, and that's just the same this time. And his promises are kind of to have a national abortion ban, to cut Social Security, cut taxes, and raise tariffs. What's Biden offering up for that? Against that? He's saying vote Biden to save American democracy, and that has been his kind of consistent message. The only problem with running on the campaign to defend the status quo is that you need to defend the status quo. I was listening to a podcast to prepare for today, just to get an idea of what people were saying, and it was by these ex-Democrat staffers, so they're very much in the Democrat machine, and they were talking. It was called Pod Save America, and they were complaining about what voters were like. They said voters have such short memories. They just seem to be voting about what's going on in the world at the time, as opposed to what they should be focused on, in their opinion, which is kind of the minutiae of policy. That on a particular day, Biden implemented a policy that's marginally better than Trump, and I think they ran headfirst into the point and still missed it. That the fact of Biden presiding over US capitalism and all of its crisis, economic crisis, racism, sexism, all of it, is a big part of the reason that is leading to Trump in the first place. You can't fight someone who's a protest of the system by saying, I'm going to keep the system in order. So I want to talk through, to explain that, I want to talk through three of the main kind of crises of US capitalism. I can't talk about everything, so there's a discussion for that. So to start off with, I want to talk about the economic crisis. So there's been kind of a continual global economic crisis all across the world since the 2007 and 8 global financial crisis, which has had huge political ramifications all across the globe. And that's only got worse under Biden. The figures, I'm not sure if people know, but like the figures of inflation are kind of even worse in the United States than they are here. Like we're talking about 7%, over 7% inflation for 2 years running, 2021 to 2022. People's real wages gone backwards about 5% since then. And I just think you get a picture of it. About a year ago, Biden's team came up with this concept of Bidenomics to kind of trumpet how amazingly Biden was doing on the economy, the stock market's doing well, and blah, 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 blah. And they've quickly dropped it. I looked up the Google Trends of how often the words, and it's just shot down because they've realized it's an absolute loser. Everyone hates what Biden's economy has looked like, and actually the opinion polls think that something like 42% of people think that Trump is a better economic manager compared to 30% for Biden. 30% for Biden, 42% for Trump. What has Biden done in the midst of that kind of crisis. So there's been a massive strike wave across the US in 2023, like a historic rise in strikes. And Biden has kind of trumpeted himself as being the first US president to stand on the picket line with UAW workers. He even asked the UAW president to kind of stand up during the United Auto Workers president, who's a significant union affiliated to the AFL-CIW in the US. He got them to stand up, but he just can't do it. Even after doing that, he kind of had to walk himself back. He started saying, and the people on Wall Street, well, they're not bad guys. And then he stumbled again. He kind of was talking about, he literally said, I'm not anti-corporation, as if any of us were worried about that. But in practice, massive actors strike. All of us were watching it here. Where was he? None of his pro-union credentials were on display. And the reality, I think, was most shown when there was the rail workers were threatening the first national strike in 30 years in late 2022. And Biden's team kind of managed to broker a deal, and they sat them down and they squashed the strike. Now, the strikers were fighting for pay, for conditions. They managed to force out of him a pay rise to basically meet inflation for those 2 years, but they're now looking at 2% pay rises a year. They're way behind. But more significantly was that they wanted sick pay. They have no sick pay whatsoever. Massively profitable railway corporations, arteries of US capitalism making it work, refused to give them sick pay, and that deal was imposed on the rail workers forcibly. Biden kind of sat down there's 12 different trade unions. He said, if you go on this strike, you're going to give the presidency to Trump. That's kind of the worst thing that could possibly happen, so you've got to give up the sick pay. But he also said, if you refuse me, I'm going to use the I can't remember the name of the bill, the Railway Labor Act, to outlaw your strikes and fully ban them. So he kind of sat on them, and there was a big vote in which AOC, all of our favourite characters, voted to crush the railway strike. So I think that shows Biden's kind of credentials on economics and why he can't run on being a kind of a pro-working class president. What about Trump on the economy? So Trump's kind of whole campaign is that he's an outsider. He doesn't fit in to Biden's ruling class kind of strategy. And an example of that was earlier this week on Thursday, Biden's campaign are running in full fundraising mode. They've outfunded because US elections these days are obviously built on billions of dollars, literally billions of dollars go into every US election. He's out fundraised. He's out fundraised Trump. He's going out on this Thursday. He broke the record for the most fundraising ever that was ever able to be raised in a single session in a kind of with Clinton and Obama in New York. On the same day, Trump went to the funeral of a cop, and his campaign team released this message. They said, meanwhile, while I'm listening to a dead cop and talking to his family, the three stooges, Biden, Obama, and Clinton, will be at a glitzy fundraiser in the city with their elitist, out-of-touch celebrity benefactors. And I think that message is a big part of the reason why Trump does have a popular base. However, the reality we know is that Trump is not an outsider. This is entirely part of his kind of marketing campaign. So for big US capital, for instance, there are some parts of Trump that they're a bit squeamish about. Didn't love the insurrection on January 6th. Some of the stuff about the tariffs on other countries do actually impinge, like US capitalism, a big part of its success over the past, 5 decades or more, has been presiding over an international globalized system, increasing trade routes. And so that system of free trade has benefited US capital. And last time, we know Trump whacked tariffs here, there, and everywhere, 25% on steel, 10% on aluminium, to try to, as part of his America First thing. But what he also did at the same time of that is slash the tax rates. He slashed the top income tax rate temporarily for 5 years, and he slashed permanently the corporate tax rate in America from 35% to 21%. And Biden hasn't done anything about that, by the way. It's still sitting at 21%, which is a huge thing. So for US big business, it's pretty easy to see which one you'd take. If you get a whatever, 15%, 14% cut in your tax rate for a few tariffs, I'll take that, yes please. And just to give an example of that, there was a interview with the CEO of, JP Morgan Chase, the global kind of finance company. In 2020, he was all out against Trump. He said, "I strongly condemn the violence in our nation's capital. This is not who we are as a people or as a country." But come this January in Davos, and he was asked, "Look like it's going to be Trump or Biden. What do you think?" He said, my company will survive and thrive under both." And I think that's the reality they're looking at. And when he was asked about Trump, he said, look, he's kind of right about NATO, kind of right about immigration, and he grew the economy pretty well. And so I think that's kind of, he's no solution for workers. Neither of them offer any solution for workers to this economic crisis. But I think, that helps us understand the dynamics. I've got to get on. So the second crisis I want to talk about in US capitalism is the geopolitical crisis. So since 1945, the US has presided over as the hegemon of this globe of the global system, and that's increasingly under threat. We've seen the relative rise in economic terms of China that's increasingly put that under threat, and the US's various interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq have not been going well. They've blown up in their faces, and so the US is finding itself in a position where it's not doing as well, struggling, massive debt, but it's still financing NATO. It's trying to finance NATO to keep back Russia over there in Ukraine. It's getting increasingly worried about China and how can we don't have enough money to fund our own subs, but we do really want to get those subs over to the Australians so that we can build up to hold back China. And then, of course, in Palestine, we all know, and we'll be talking about all this weekend, what that's looked like. Biden's pitch at his State of the Union was absolutely about bringing together those two things. He said, freedom and democracy are under attack both at home and underseas, and we need to join together to defend democracy. What he was saying is he was being a strong man, saying, I'm the one who can hold back Russia, hold back China, and hold back Trump at home. And that's been his kind of pitch. He's been attacking Trump for being weak on China, weak on Russia, and all of the other. So where is this kind of crisis sitting people? Well, we know, he's been rebranded Genocide Joe. He's been failing in the polls. There's a massive kind of bifurcation or something in the Democratic base. People under 35 overwhelmingly hate what he's done in Palestine, and that he's supported it, while the over 35s haven't. He's been falling in the polls with people of colour. He's down 15% across all people of colour, and black people and Hispanic people are increasingly turning to Trump, actually. What about Trump? So Trump talks tough on Israel. We all know he moved the embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv when he was in power. He approved masses of settlements, and now he's attacking. He's obviously, politically speaking, a much closer ally, closer to Netanyahu in terms of domestic politics. So he's attacked the Democrats for being too critical of Netanyahu, and he said that Israel just needs to finish them, speaking about Palestinians. So he's speaking very tough, but in reality, Trump's whole pitch is in general, isolationist. The US is spending too much money abroad, too much money in NATO, and too much money in Israel. And so actually, if you look at the support for Trump versus Biden in Israel, I think it tells a very clear picture. So go back to the 2020 election when they were facing off. The support of Trump in Israel was 63%. To 17% for Biden. It's if it was a state of America, it would be the reddest state. More Trump supporting than Texas, Alabama, you name it. But now that's actually completely shifted. Biden support in the Israel is running at 40% to Trump's 26%, and that is because Biden has proved himself to the Israelis that he will serve them, he will back them, he will fundraise them, he will give them billions of dollars, $14 billion. He'll find ways to get around Congress to make sure that the genocide is continuing to be funded. And I think it just needs to be said in this picture. Neither gives us any way out of this kind of imperialist crisis. Biden is kind of the US imperialist. He's running on that. He's attacking Trump for not being imperialist enough, and particularly on Ukraine. Meanwhile, Trump is promising trade wars, and we know from history that trade wars lead to hot wars. So it's part of the same process. So neither offers a solution to that. The final crisis I want to talk about is kind of what explains the rise of Trump, and that's the political crisis. All across the world, there's been a fall of kind of the neoliberal centre, the extreme centre, whatever you want to call it. Labour parties, Liberal parties have been falling away, and the far right, and also opportunities for the far left, have been presenting themselves. So if you've seen the polling for the upcoming elections in the European Union in a couple of months, they're just horrifying. So in France, National Rally, which is a party with historic roots to fascism, is polling at 33%. And then, if you know Eric Zemmour's party, Reconquête, I'm not quite sure how to say it. He's polling at 6% for that. So you've got a massive 39% of people voting for far right and fascist parties in France, which is incredibly concerning. In Germany, the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, is now outpolling the Labour Party, the SPD over there. The SPD has just absolutely fallen in the polls. We've got Meloni's victory in Poland. It's a crisis all across the system, and of course Trump is. Both represents this, and he was part of encouraging that trend. I mean, when he was in power, he bolstered the far right all across the world, made people feel confident. And Trump's kind of movement inside America, I think, has been, the title of this talk talks about Trumpism, and I think it's not just one wacko individual. He has kind of bolstered this movement, both inside the Republican Party, where he's gaining increasing control. In last October, they knocked off the Speaker of the House of Representatives for being a bit too soft on Biden. He's sacked 60 people from the RNC, the Republican National Committee, which is supposed to get him elected, installed his daughter-in-law into the co-chair of that. There's a whole array of kind of far-right politicians, Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Freedom Caucus, growing, which have been growing since the Tea Party, so since 2008. They've rebranded themselves as pro-Trump, but they've got longer roots than that. So they're inside the Republican Party, but also maybe more concerningly outside. We've all been watching the kind of, I feel like my feed is just constantly full of what's happening with school boards, all these anti-trans and anti-gay, anti-abortion movements, the Proud Boys, Mums for Liberty, there's an increasing kind of far right that are confident and will definitely be emboldened by a Trump victory. And I just think, Biden's strategy against that is never going to work. Lawfare, impeachments, talking him down, out fundraising him, it's just all grist to the mill. Trump's thing is, I'm under attack, defend me, I'm defending you, they're attacking me, they're only attacking me because they hate you. And I think Democrats just don't understand that in the context of growing anger and resentment against the system, calling to reimpose that system just doesn't cut it. And I also think it's worth saying that in terms of the massive attacks on abortion that we've seen, which have their roots in that kind of right-wing campaigning of the far right of the Republican Party for decades, that's now saw Roe versus Wade overturned, Biden and the Democrats have offered absolutely no alternative to that. What happened after Roe versus Wade? It is just horrific. Within 100 days, 1 in 3 women across the United States had no or massively restricted rights to abortion. I was looking at some of these stories of in Alabama. One woman was jailed under, quote, chemical endangerment. She was refused prenatal care. She had to give birth in the jail shower. It is, and at the same time, there's been an explosion of quote these privately funded kind of baby boxes all around the world because there's people wanting to abandon their babies. They have no economic support, and they're literally leaving them in these privately funded baby boxes that have just. There's an architect talking about how they've become part of public infrastructure now since the overturning of Roe versus Wade. Incredibly dark kind of picture. And what was Biden's message? And what was the Democrats' message in the middle of this? Literally, in the month after it, there was a new campaign started called... that's on the next page. But it was called Don't Just Complain, Vote. His big message was, there are the midterm elections in November. We can't do anything now, but don't worry, come this November, if you vote them out, maybe we can gradually push things back, which is the absolute opposite of the message. People needed to take to the streets. There was an explosion of protest. That protest needed to go further. That protest needed to force the Supreme Court's hand. This is an absolutely existential threat to women, and it needed to be beat back. I'll wrap up now by just talking about the building an alternative. So the AFR, the Australian Financial Review, summarised this as a fight of capitalism versus capitalists. Joe Biden represents US capitalism, and Trump represents kind of capitalists', wet dream of what America could look like. The alternative is obvious, and it's possible. We need an anti-capitalist movement, and I think the raw material for that movement is there in the streets of America every day, and I'd love to talk about this in the discussion. Black Lives Matter, the biggest, social movement in US history, strikes are back. Literally in 2023, the number of strike days lost, their Bureau of Labour Statistics takes account of the number of strike days lost. It was running at almost 4 million per month for 5 months, which is like 25 times higher than the last 20 years. Abortion movements, the Palestine movement, and so on. But I think all of these movements face a real question. In US history, the Democrats have historically been such a graveyard for the social movements. And we saw that with abortion. I was kind of mentioning it was the League of Women Voters put up a campaign, don't just vent, vote. That was the main message. Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are backing in Biden, saying he's one of the most successful presidents in US history, and channeling all of that energy back into the election, back into support for the system, is a huge problem. The alternative that many left parties, I think, take is kind of sectarian approach. We just need to build these kind of small socialist groups over on the sidelines who can call out how terrible everything is, and then one day maybe we'll be big enough to beat the Democrats and beat the Republicans. I looked up in the independents running, there's 4 or 5, depending on how you cut it, separate socialist parties running for the presidential election. And I think what we need to say is that neither. What we need is a socialist movement that intervenes, that becomes a part of those movements, that tries to deepen those movements, strengthen those movements, and try and turn it into an alternative, like an alternative to capitalism versus capitalists, a socialist, revolutionary kind of movement. And so just to give one example, before I wrap up, the uncommitted movement in the United States. I don't know if you've seen, obviously, the context of Palestine, massive rallies, 300,000 people marching on the streets. Jewish Voice for Peace have had all of those amazing demonstrations, kind of blocking bridges, blocking train stations. And in that context, there's been this so-called uncommitted movement, which I don't know if you've seen it, but there's been in the Democratic primaries and caucuses that have been happening at the moment, which Biden is just absolutely winning without a doubt. There have been people saying, we don't want Biden, we don't want anyone else. And there's hundreds of thousands of people now who voted that way. 13% in Michigan, 19% in Minnesota, 12% in North Carolina, 10% in Massachusetts. So there is within this, I think you can see the potential. You can see the potential for this to be, like, I've looked at some of the interviews of the organisers. They're under so much pressure. You're going to elect Trump. How dare you do this? And there have been 2 responses. One response has been of the organisers of the uncommitted movement. One response has been, this actually doesn't matter about Trump because we're just talking about the pre-selections and the primaries and the caucuses. So when it comes, what people actually do on the day is a totally different thing. And we're not saying anything about that. And I think that is clearly positioning themselves to be a left lobby group within the Democrats. But there's been another response by other organisers of this movement, and they have said, if Biden wants our vote, he needs to do better. Like, he can't be supporting genocide on the other side of the world and then expect us to vote for him come November. And I think in there you can see the potential for that militancy and anger against the system to be organised and extended and basically speak inside the movements for a kind of for a social movement alternative to capitalism versus capitalists. So I'll let people have the discussion, but I think that is the problem for the US left, and I think there are parallels for that kind of all around the world.